back to
How are you?
the Enterprise
Thank you.
Editorial Board.
Thank you.
I think it has been 2 years since we did an edit board. I'm pretty sure.
Really? No, we did at least one somewhere along the way. Yeah, during the first year we did one.
Well, if
We
you-
haven't done one recently.
No. If you recall, we are on the record.
Yep.
Our newest reporter, but longtime member of the Gatehouse family, Mark
Okay.
Rock, has been reporting out of
Okay.
this.
All right.
And you've met Amy McKinnon.
We just met outside. Yeah.
Excellent.
We met before, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So you can give us a little opening statement, or we can jump into questions as you choose.
Well, I don't know. I guess a real brief opening statement would just basically be that, I've been serving as the mayor of the city of Brockton for 22 months. I think that we've done a lot of good work. I think we've started a lot of good projects. I think we are making a difference. I think a 2-year term is really hard to govern under. You're in office for 16 months and you have to announce that you're running for re-election. So I think that, if there's a frustration on my part, that probably we've done a lot of good work that no one knows anything about yet because it's, things that have not yet come to fruition. But at the same token, I do feel like within 22 months that we have made some noticeable changes. And perhaps the biggest one being just in terms of the attitude of Brockton towards business and development. I think that I came into office 22 months ago with a perception in the business and development community that Brockton was a really tough place to do business. I think I came into office 22 months ago into a city that was perceived by not just the private sector, but the public sector as being a city with, as when I met with Marty Jones, the head of mass development during my first couple of weeks, and she was very straightforward with me. She said, you don't have a plan and you don't have a planner. Until you have those things, you're not going to be taken seriously at the statewide level. And I think we're sitting here 22 months later with not just a planner, who we have, and a junior planner, but we have a whole economic development team. We've created a Main Street manager. We've got a new director at the BRA. We've got a new executive director at the B21. And I think we really have, and obviously the Metro South Chamber of Commerce is part of that team too. So I do think that within a relatively short period of time, we have assembled a planning and economic development team. And I think that we have changed the perception, both in government and in the private sector, that Brockton does have its act together now, and Brockton is a place that you can come develop and do business. And I think if you just go back about 6 months ago, when Mass Development recognized Brockton as one of, it was 8 or 10 cities that they awarded these transformative district initiatives to. Now, I'll tell you, 2 years ago, Brockton wouldn't have even submitted an application, let alone be selected. But I think that was a recognition at the state level from both, the governor's level and Mass Development's level, that we are doing some good work in Brockton now. And this TDI initiative brings us some additional resources for planning to supplement our planning department. Because even though I've hired 2 planners, we need more. I just can't afford any more right now. But we've come a long ways in 22 months. But this TDI initiative brought us in an outside consultant doing about $100,000 worth of consulting work on Mass Development's tab to help us create this TDI district in downtown Brockton, have a phase 1 of the redevelopment, revitalization of downtown Brockton. And we rolled that out for community input a couple weeks ago, and it was very well received. And so I think that is substantially different. I think as a result of a lot of that, I really think that we've created some sense of optimism about Brockton's future that didn't exist 2 years ago. And I think that when I came into office 2 years ago, Brockton had been on the slide for a while, and I just don't think there were a lot of people that thought Brockton could get it turned around. Now, I'll be the first one to say we've got a lot of work to do. I am not by any means suggesting that there's been a miraculous recovery in Brockton, but I do suggest that I think there's a perception amongst most open-minded people that we have turned the ship in the right direction, and we've got a plan. We know where we're going. We have a plan as to how to get there.
Do you know where you're going? Where are you going? Articulate it briefly.
In terms of Brockton? Sure.
You're the one who just said,
Yeah.
we know where we're going.
Absolutely. So, my vision, I'll share with you my vision of the city of Brockton. I see a Brockton that becomes a very livable city, where we really improve the quality of life for people who live there, and that's everything from stabilizing neighborhoods to reducing crime to cleaning up and revitalizing business districts. I think we do have an excellent school system, but we have to maintain that and continue to strive to improve against some really overwhelming challenges. I think we've got great potential for economic development and economic growth, and I think with this economic development team we've assembled, I think we've identified growth industries that we're actively pursuing, like food processing, like biomed, essentially almost any business or industry that needs water or sewer. Brockton is a great potential development for. And also in the medical fields. You know, how many cities of 100,000 can say they have 3 hospitals? Well, Brockton can say that. VA, Good Samaritan, and Brockton. We have 3 hospitals. So we look at our economic development plans as an example. We see that area. We're in conversations with Stewart Good Samaritan about developing this developable area in that vicinity around the Good Samaritan Hospital. We think there's a real opportunity to bring in other medical types of uses that would feed off of a hospital, that want to be near a hospital. And you couple that with the highway locations. I mean, medical, food processing, biomed, we've really got some growth industries here in the city. But I actually, those are key, but I also think a key for the future of Brockton is entrepreneurs and small business. And when I look at it, and people misinterpret the comments sometimes, but I think that in Brockton we're creating something as simple as we came out with a business guide recently, just very recently. It's kind of a handbook for a small business or someone looking to start a small business, how to navigate their way through Brockton city government. What do you need for licenses and permits? Where do you go to get it? And we're in the process now that we're just tweaking the final edition of that. We're having it translated into 3 other languages, because I believe the future growth of the economy in the city, a large part of that is going to be not just small business, it's minority-owned small businesses, it's women-owned small businesses, it's immigrant-owned small businesses, because those are emerging populations in our city. We see it happening already in small business, but I don't think we've done a very good job of encouraging them or supporting them up to this point. And I think that's one of the key philosophies that we're changing. But what I see, and I have friends from all 3 of those groups that have had success with business in Brockton. And what I see happening all the time is they reinvest in Brockton. They don't take their money and go someplace else. They expand that existing business, or they buy another business, or they buy some commercial property. But if we can help these startup businesses and family businesses, particularly immigrant, minority, women-owned businesses, to succeed in the city, it's going to foster that growth, because they're going to reinvest in the city of Brockton. And we need private investment in the city of Brockton. What I don't see is the future of the city of Brockton is a city that has nothing but nonprofits and social service agencies. We've got to rebuild our commercial tax base and re-energize private investment in the city. And we're seeing that beginning to happen already.
2 things. One, can you be, for my edification, a bit more specific about naming the businesses or the types of businesses or the location of the businesses that have come into the city since you became mayor? And 2, one of the platforms you ran on was that we needed to reduce the commercial tax rate in order to entice people to come. And has that happened?
No, it has not. However, they haven't raised it either, which is the beginning. But you're right. all of these, why I've emphasized so much the economic development as being a key part of our first term, for just the reasons that you mentioned. We do need to expand the tax base, particularly the commercial tax base. So what I will cite to you is that we just got the numbers in for this past year, this past fiscal year, on new growth in tax revenues. Now, in the budget, we had predicted about $800,000 of new growth.
In commercial or residential?
Just overall.
Just overall.
Overall, $800,000, that there would be new growth in tax revenue of $800,000. The numbers are in. We're just waiting for the final certification from the DOR of the numbers. We've got the numbers. The growth is actually about 2.1 million. It's the second largest year of new growth in the history of the city. And the only year that was larger was under the prior administration, when Stewart Healthcare bought Good Samaritan, and that entire complex went from non-taxable to taxable when it was purchased by Stewart, and that was about a $2.3 million tax bill. Other than that 1 year of the purchase of Stewart, this current year we've had the largest growth in tax revenue. And when you look at the numbers, the vast majority of it is in the commercial tax base.
That's what I was going to ask you.
It's almost all in the commercial tax base.
Could you identify any big outliers out of that number versus a lot of incremental?
Well, that also can indicate a business expanding or reinvesting purchase, because commercial property is part of that commercial tax rate. So I guess a quick example to answer both of your questions, real recently, would be West Chestnut Street. That West Chestnut Street corridor that we've identified as one of our development districts. Since we've been mayor, we've helped bring in both Boston Fresh, which is a produce processing company, and then more recently, Kenworth Trucking. Kenworth Trucking, although they took over an existing space, they invested $3 million in that existing space. All that equipment becomes taxable. So I think that's two very good examples right there. We've also got Able Restoration that had come into the city recently, right around the time I was coming in, but since I became mayor, they've closed their Providence operation and merged it into the Brockton location, so they've had a dramatic increase in size in Brockton by merging Providence into Brockton. I think, in recent years, we've seen a lot of companies do that in the opposite direction, take their Brockton operations and bring it someplace else. Able Restoration came in here, purchased a piece of property, and then made a business decision that it made sense for them to bring the Providence operation into Brockton. But we have it on the local level too. I mean, you can take a place like where I used to work before I ran for mayor, the former Sidelines restaurant on the east side. Well, Tommy Doyle took over that space. He invested over $1 million in that restaurant, and it's doing a thriving business. So it doesn't always have to be the home run that brings in 80 jobs. It's all size businesses. But I think the bottom line is these growth numbers are the first tangible indicator that we're having some success with this emphasis that we've put on developing our economy and making it more business friendly, streamlining red tape, changing the attitudes of city departments towards how we work with our customers, whether it's a resident that's coming in to get a copy of a birth certificate, or it's that person walking into City Hall who's thinking about opening a business in the city. I think we've made a lot of progress there. I think that, that's the economic development piece. There's certainly plenty of other areas we've worked in. I think that I think we've made great strides in information technology.
The other big one, though, before we get into successes, the economic development, I believe you would agree, is never going to reach potential until we can overcome the perception and the reality of Brockton as a dangerous place to live.
Yep. So the perception of the city, particularly of those from outside the city, is absolutely the biggest challenge we face, and I think about it constantly. It's one of the reasons I supported the casino proposal, because I believe that a destination resort casino, a $650 million entertainment complex, that now people are making plans to come to Brockton and, God forbid, even stay overnight, and then we have a luxury hotel that's not full of homeless families. I think that is a critical piece of changing the perception. When I spoke in front of the Gaming Commission, I said, I think that complex transforms Brockton from a city to drive through to a city to drive to. It gives us a real destination that people want to come to in the city. But beyond that, you're right. Fighting crime is job one. It takes up more of my time than anything else. And I think that we've done a lot. But you're right. Until we can change the perception that it's okay to unlock your doors and get out of your car in Brockton, it's going to be tough to achieve the things we want to achieve. But I guess as the mayor, what's even more important to me, or just as important to me, is I need the folks who live here to feel that way. And I need the businesses. That's a business economic development factor. When I visit business groups, and I do it all the time, we have 3 business associations in the city. I attend their meetings all the time. I was at the Campella Business Association yesterday, the day before. I talk about crime to them every time I go because they care just as much about crime as the residents do, because they need, for their businesses to be successful, they need for customers to be willing to come to their business location. And that's critical for me.
In 2013, you frequently told your opponent that Massachusetts was the second most dangerous city in the state. I mean, Brockton was the second most dangerous city in the state. Where do we stand today?
The new numbers are now. So the numbers are only in for my first year in office because there's a delay from the time that the FBI. Is that me? I could have sworn I turned it off. I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it vibrate.
Okay.
Does it all day long. I usually know it. Yeah, you can take that back.
Thanks. I appreciate
Make
that.
it go away. So the new numbers are out for my first year in office. We dropped to number 6 on that list. So I think that's a dramatic improvement 1 year.
Right, but crime overall is up in Brockton.
No, it's not. You're wrong.
In terms of shootings, in terms of
No,
violent
in terms of
crimes?
violent crime is down, property crime is down. The only crime statistic in my first year that was up was homicides. Homicides were up.
In your first year, but
No, even now, it's down. It's a misconception. Crime has actually decreased. However, the most high-profile type things that you report a lot more dramatically than you used to is when shots are fired from a gun. And we absolutely have had a number of shots fired calls, and they're high-profile, and they scare the daylights out of everybody, including me. It's one of the biggest things I worry about. I don't think there's a city in Massachusetts that is not facing these 2 challenges of gun violence and drug addiction. And today, those 2 things, you can't really separate them anymore because the drug dealers are all carrying guns and the gang members are in the drug distribution business. We execute a drug raid hoping to get a gun. When we stop someone because we believe they have a gun in the car, we think there's a good chance we're going to find drugs also. And I don't have the statistics with me, but I'll be happy to send them to you. I just had the police chief give them to me recently. The vast majority of crimes are down. The overall crime, both violent and nonviolent, is down. We have a problem with gunfire in the city. There's no question about it. It's one of the reasons why I made the decision to invest in ShotSpotter, because I see 5 or 6 other Massachusetts cities using ShotSpotter effectively. And we looked at how Boston uses it. And when we went down to visit Bratton in New York a couple months ago, one of the places that we visited during our day there is we had our chief of police and chief of detectives spend some time with the people that run ShotSpotter in New York City. And they've only brought it out within the past year. They're already making plans to expand the coverage area. And the thing with ShotSpotter, I think one of the misconceptions of it, so the critic will say, that's reactive, that's not proactive. I say if we get the guy with the gun, it's proactive because we know it's the same relatively small group of people riding around the city with illegal crime guns shooting at each other. Something that doesn't get reported, since July 1st, between the state police and the Brockton police, we have taken over 40 illegal guns off the streets. Over 40 since July 1st between state police and Brockton police combined within the city of Brockton.
Yeah, I just suggested if you told us that, we might report it.
Okay. Point well taken. However, one of our biggest challenges that I can't control is we make that arrest, we get the gun off the street, but the next day the guy that had the gun is right back on the street. The courts don't hold him. And I will tell you that the vast majority of the people that we arrest with a gun already have at least 2, if not 3, open cases pending. We're arresting a lot of the same people over and over. We've arrested people with ankle bracelets. They're so recently released from incarceration, they've got ankle bracelets on. So it's frustrating, and I don't think it's all, and obviously, as the mayor, you're responsible for everything that happens in your city. But I don't for a minute think that the mayor or the police chief of the city by itself is going to overcome the problem of gun violence. It's a community problem. The long-term solutions are community-based. It's school teachers, it's parents, it's churches, it's nonprofit organizations, and getting everyone to work together with government in putting in long-term solutions. And they go from on the front end, getting curriculum into the elementary and middle schools, to on the other end, doing a far better job on reentry programs, so that when you've got people getting out of incarceration and coming back to the city, and listen, a lot of them are players and they can't wait to get back into the game. But not always. Some of those folks being released have made a decision that they'd like to, get out of the game. However, if they don't have treatment for their mental health or substance abuse disorders, if they can't get a job, if they don't have a place to live, if those opportunities aren't there, it's not going to take very long for them to be right back doing what they were doing and reoffending and ending up right back in the county jail.
So, given that virtuous circle,
but
what do you need to fix or break?
Well, see, those are the long-term things. But in the short run, getting back to your question, I go out to almost all of these incidents that happen. It's very rare that I don't go out and visit one, and there's usually a really good reason why I didn't make it. So what I can tell you is that if they just picked up 5 shell casings at the bottom of your driveway, you don't really want to listen to my plans for long-term solutions. You want to know what I'm going to do today to make your neighborhood safer. And so that has been a big focus. It has to be. So that's why we've instituted motorcycle patrols that we didn't have before, because we have them out doing proactive policing. It's why I brought back bicycle patrols after an 8-year hiatus, putting bicycles in business districts and parks and playgrounds, because I need families to feel safe to go to the playground. It's why we've invested in ShotSpotter. We worked with the county sheriff to get new fingerprinting technology. We've made a commitment to community policing, real community policing. We've established a couple of community policing positions, community outreach officers. And I think the real key one being Eliza Fonts, who is a Cape Verdean female who's doing a ton of great work for us in outreach in the Cape Verdean community. And in a lot of these instances where there's been gunshots or gunfire, families are reaching out to her, and she's doing work with families that you or I wouldn't get into the family or wouldn't be trusted by the family. And I want to continue to expand that. Like everything else, right now we're so understaffed, it's really hard to take a cop off of patrol. But it's why I'm in the process of hiring 21 new police officers.
Where are you getting the money for that? It's
not necessarily coming from somewhere else. In terms of this year, we allocated some of that new growth money to it. It's easy to say we can't afford it. I've come to the decision that we can't afford not to, for the premise of your original question. Because if we can't turn the crime around, you're not going to succeed at any of the other things we're working on. We've got 9 coming out of the academy the end of October, 12 going in January. When those 12 go on the payroll in January, that will bring police staffing to, when I became mayor, the day I was sworn in, we had 177 police officers. In January, when those 12 come on, we'll have 196. That is real growth of 19 positions, plus having filled 2 years' worth of vacancies. So that's backfilling all the vacancies, and then having growth of 19 positions from not quite 2 years ago. So yeah, it's expensive. There was some time last year when I was in front of the city council and they weren't rushing to approve some overtime money for me. Well, when you don't have enough bodies and you need more cops on the street, then you have the only other way to do it is with overtime. And it's funny because I remember being, grilled pretty good for a couple of city council meetings where some councils were inferring that I was being fiscally irresponsible by spending $200,000 more this year than we did last year on overtime. But it's amazing, when I'm out in the neighborhoods knocking on doors right now, no one has ever told me, not one resident of this city has ever told me that I'm spending too much money on police. If anything, they tell me the exact opposite. We need more cops. So does that mean probably making cuts in other parts of the budget? Sure. Does that mean it's harder to hold the line on taxes? Yes. But I think at the end of the day, an overwhelming majority of both the residents and the business owners in this city want to see us build up our police resources, and that includes boots on the ground.
I wouldn't disagree with you on that. As I recall, when you were...
Were you taking notes 2 years ago or what? You remember more about 2 years ago than I do.
We talked, even before you ran, we talked about the structure of the city government, who was in government, whether the money was being spent wisely, efficiently. All of those issues came up in preliminary conversations before you did announce even. What have you found or what have you done in the past 22 months to rationalize that?
I think a lot. I think that what we've identified is, and I think it was one of the premises I came in on, the city government can run more efficiently, and that the city government that I took over in terms of technology was stuck in about 1986. As far behind as I thought we were during the campaign, it was worse when I got there. I couldn't believe. I wish I had one of the forms with me. A personnel action form. This is a form, about 5 copies with carbon paper, that was typed on a typewriter, not a computer. Because of the carbon paper, you had to type it on a typewriter. It was prepared by a secretary, or I shouldn't say secretary, prepared by an administrative support person of some type. Then went to the department head of that department for a signature. This was done for every single routine personnel change. An anniversary pay raise, any type of change of address, any type of change in regards to the employee's information required a personnel action form. The prepared on this multiple carbon copy thing, given to a department head to sign. That department head then had to send it to the personnel office for them to sign it. Then they sent it to me for me to sign it. And then it went back to personnel. So I think we've handled it for about the 5th time. Now, when everybody gets to keep a carbon copy, what they do with them, I don't know. And when it gets all the way back to the personnel office, now having been handled like 5 times, you know what they do with it? Enter it into the computer system. It was mind-boggling. And so one of the things we've done is we've eliminated that form. Now, when I first said we're going to automate the personnel action form, I had 5 people tell me why that doesn't work. Well, guess what? We do it that way now because it was ludicrous that we were still handling routine personnel transactions in that manner. That form does not exist anymore. It's been fully automated. And now things pop up on my email and the department head and I just go click. And that's it. And it's already in the system. It's only being entered into the system once. It's a couple of clicks and it's done. No paper, no handling, no delay. That's just an example. There are all kinds of examples of this. Let me give you another one that the public doesn't know about yet that will come to reality in the next 30 days. City vehicles, all of them, other than the fire trucks, gas up at the DPW. All municipalities have their own gas because you don't pay taxes on it and all that stuff. So when all these city vehicles, DPW, whoever it is, everybody that's got a city vehicle of any type, when they go to get gas, another city employee pumps the gas for them. So we're paying one city employee to pump the gas for another city employee who sits there and watch them do it. I'm thinking to myself, how many of these folks pump their own gas in their private cars? I'd venture to say 95%. There's very little full-service gas available anymore, and very few people use it. So one of the things, getting back to your original question, that I did in our first year, and we've expanded in our second year, is I brought in the Collins Center from UMass Boston in a consultant's role. They work with over 100 municipalities in the city and had them come in specifically on the issue of information technology, how to implement collecting data and then managing data in order to make both management and budget decisions based upon real data. Not, we're going to give you 1.5% more than we gave you last year, but we really have no idea how in the world you're spending it. Or we're going to give you 3% less than last year, make do. Because in any given year, maybe you got to give someone else a little more because there's a really good reason to do it, and maybe someone else really doesn't need what they're getting. That's the model for that is CityStat. Anyhow, so getting back to the gas, do you know for personnel what it takes for us to pump gas? 4 full-time highway maintenance men who do nothing but pump gas and answer the phone when the office is closed. We are getting ready to install an automated gas system, which is how all the other cities similar in size to Brockton do it. It's going to be equipment with a fob or swipe and cameras, and you pull up to the pump and you swipe and it immediately identifies the vehicle and the employee, and you put your own gas in and you drive away. Not only do we save 4 positions, but it creates automatic record keeping and reports that we generate by hand right now. When they get done pumping the gas, you know what they do? They take out one of these receipt pads from like 1975 and they handwrite your vehicle. You tell them what your mileage is. They write down your mileage. They write down how many gallons you took. And then when we say, okay, we need statements for budget reasons, we're now paying clerks to go through all this paperwork and put it in some sort of form that we can actually do something with it. Well, with the new automated gas system, it's all eliminated. It's one employee can go in, hit a few buttons, create reports, create real-time reports, let alone budget reports. So what we're doing, so we invest, roughly $50,000 up front to install this system. The savings in personnel is $250,000. I'm not laying the people off. Our roads are in horrible condition. What we've done is we've created a full-time 4-man highway maintenance crew that will actually be back out on a truck repairing roads every day instead of pumping gas for other city employees. So that is not installed yet, but literally the equipment is ordered and I expect to get it installed in the next 30 days. It's something we've been working on for probably 8 or 10 months. It was one of the many recommendations that came when we bring this Collins Center in from the outside and they start evaluating what we're doing. The first 2 departments I had them work with, because they don't come in and start working with everybody, was DPW and police.
Is that the group you use the state grant for?
No, one has nothing to do with the other.
Okay.
One is the group that does the state grant is a group called Stan Tech, and they were selected by Mass Development. It was my idea based upon a number of mayor's meetings and trainings that I went to very early on, that this was a resource with a state university. They actually did a lot of the work the first year pro bono. but even for some of the consulting work we're paying for, they charge a fraction of what a private consultant would charge for municipalities. They're a great resource, and they give you that real independent look, and they identify for you what best practices are, because they work with over 100 municipalities now, so they know how everyone else does things. So I think we are fundamentally, piece by piece, changing the way city government automates. And I think, I've probably got us from 1986 to 1998 now. We still have a long ways to go, but we're moving the needle in that direction. You can start to see the results of it, and that makes city government much more efficient. But we're also using the technology to make city government more accessible and easier to access for the residents. So, we've got a brand new website. Now, we're probably only using 25% of the capability of what that website is eventually going to be able to do, but it's light years better than the one it replaced. So amongst the things in that new website is a virtual city hall. You can download any form or application that's available at City Hall. You can go on, click an icon, another click, get a PDF copy of it, download it, and print it. Up until we had that, you had to go to City Hall, get the application, go wherever you're going to fill it out, prepare it, and bring it back again. We've at least eliminated the first trip. We're working on eliminating the second trip. We are actively working on automating all of our licensing and permitting. That's going to be an ongoing project. That's going to take probably 3-4 years to get them all on there, because you kind of do it on a department by department, function by function basis, but we're actively working on it. And the last piece of the Collins Center, DPW and police the first year. This year we've expanded it, and I've now asked them to look at our code enforcement and licensing, because I don't think, from my background as having worked as an outside code enforcement officer in the Board of Health, I think we're very fragmented. I think the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is doing. At times it's territorial. At other times people are doing other people's jobs. So now they'll come in and help us evaluate exactly where we are with licensing and code enforcement. And then, phase 2 of that, they'll come in and make concrete recommendations. So DPW and police, because they're two of the larger department budgets, and because I knew it was desperately needed. A small step with the new website is we now have on that website a GIS map of the locations of all the level 2 and level 3 sex offenders. You can go on the website, pull up a map, has a bunch of dots all over it, click on the dot, it'll show you the person's photograph and where they live. I think parents have a right to know if there's a sex offender living in their neighborhood. But before, you had to go to the police station and look on the wall. That was the only way you could really get the information. Or online through the state, but it was very difficult to access. They don't really store it in an easy way. You can look at all of it, but unless you know where all those streets are, you don't know who's near you and who isn't near you. This is a nice, easy to look at map. Look at my neighborhood. There's a dot, there's a dot, there's a dot. Click, click, click. Now I know if there's a sex offender living in my neighborhood, because maybe I'll have my kids walk a different path to school, or maybe I won't let my kids walk to school. So the technology, and the best one is, can I have my phone back? See Click Fix. Have you checked out See Click Fix? We're not the only city with it, but one of the first ones to get it. So See Click Fix.
I've used it somewhere.
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yes.
So See Click Fix was one of the investments in technology we made. So with See Click Fix, any resident 24/7 can communicate a whole host, almost any type of complaint or feedback.
Lights out, sidewalk broken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the way to
Stores.
police.
Yeah.
So it has a very easy to use iPhone app. You hit the icon once, it comes right up on the screen. You want to report something. Literally, I use this. When I'm driving around and I see things, I stop, you take a picture of it, you attach a photo. I'm telling you, it takes 2 or 3 minutes to report something. But what this has done, more than just make it easier for the resident to report something, because they don't have to call 8:30 through 4:30, Monday through Friday, it's added accountability, because I think this was one of my other criticisms of city government, going back to what you were talking about. It was a lack of accountability. Someone calls City Hall and it gets bounced from department to department to department to department. Problem never gets fixed. No one ever owns it. Well, with the See Click Fix, when you report that, it automatically goes into a live blog that not only can I see it and the department heads see it, anyone from the public can see it. The only type of complaint we keep off the live blog is landlord complaints. And that was a recommendation. We tried it for just a little bit, but there was a lot of stuff getting posted that wasn't the intent of See Click Fix. So other than landlord complaints, all the other See Click Fix stuff is right on there. So now this person puts it in, you get an email acknowledgement immediately that it has gone through. When the department it goes by email automatically to one or two departments, wherever it has to go to. When the department opens it up, they send an acknowledgement that they've received it. So you know the exact date and time that city department is acknowledging receiving that complaint. And then when they have a resolution for it, they have to go back in and put in what the resolution was and close it out. So, you know, this type of accountability was foreign to city government before. But, you know, so long as everybody's doing their job, it's a good thing because I think it's worked both ways. I think, yeah, it's added accountability for the city departments for sure. I get a lot of positive feedback from people saying, you know what, I reported that thing on See Click Fix and, you know, 3 days later, they're out there fixing that pothole. And then I got a notice back letting me know that the pothole had been fixed. So that's using technology to make city government more accessible to the residents, but also making it more accountable to the residents.
Amy, Steve, I've been monopolizing.
So I have a question about something some of your critics...
I feel like I'm under the hot lamp here, like this is something to move, like, you know.
Some of your critics have
Watching
raised
48 hours.
concerns that people donate to your campaign and a few months later you support their business in the city.
The one specific example they're citing is Brewster Ambulance, who donated money to my campaign, and then, I don't know, 6-8 months later, I selected based upon an RFP. The contributions were, first of all, they weren't the only ambulance company that donated. EastCare also donated. But those contributions were reported properly, fully disclosed, accessible online through OCPF for anyone that wants to look on. I mean, it's completely transparent. The difference between...
There was that with the ambulance, with Jay Cashman.
Oh, Jay Cashman's...
And with both medical marijuana facility applicants.
Yep. So, first of all, Jay...
And those are just the ones that I...
They're probably the only ones I can think of. In terms of... here's the difference between being the challenger and being the incumbent. When you're in office, people, even people who don't like you, donate to your campaign fund. And when you're the incumbent, you have an advantage in fundraising because it's a lot easier to ask people to give to your campaign. I don't believe I solicited any of those contributions. And they only represent, I think the biggest one is Brewster Ambulance. We've raised well over $100,000. You're talking about, in terms of Brewster Ambulance, maybe 3% of the money I raised and the others even a lot less. But people donate to your campaign. You can go back and look at any of my predecessors. They all received campaign donations from vendors of the city, people who work for the city, all of those things. It's part of the deal.
You have as well, correct?
What's that?
As city employees, you've...
Yes. Never solicited one because you're not allowed. It would be illegal to solicit one. Apparently some of them think I'm doing a pretty good job. I look at campaign contributions as a vote of confidence. People think you're doing a good job. But there's no doubt that, and not just these specific three, I think there's no doubt that some people donate to your campaigns. They want you to return their phone call someday. It's how it works. I didn't create this system. The question is, there's nothing wrong with that. So let me start. What you've described right now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's only a problem if you promise to do something for someone in return for the contribution. And I've never done that. The Jay Cashman thing, my God, if anyone watched the last campaign and didn't know what my position was on the power plant, they weren't paying any attention. I was crystal clear when I was running for mayor that I thought we should settle the suit on the electric plant. So I don't think there's any surprise there. I've talked about medical marijuana frequently. I voted against the referendum question. I don't think it's a good idea. However, it's the law. So the only regulation the city has is was regarding zoning and location. That was the only input the city had. However, with that medical marijuana outfit, and there were two of them, right? There's two. With the one who got the license, and by the way, I think you really need to separate that one. The mayor has absolutely no say in who the state board of the state Department of Public Health awards that license to.
Except that you can write a letter.
You can write a letter. And I did write a letter for the company that didn't get it. That's how much influence the mayor has. And also 10 or 11 city councilors wrote letters for the same medical marijuana place I did. Because even though I didn't support the question, I looked at it that once it's become the law, and I know there's one coming to Brockton, then I think it was my job to evaluate and make a recommendation on the one that I thought would be the best for Brockton to work with. Unfortunately, the one I liked wasn't the one that got the license. The one that did get the license, we did negotiate with them a host community agreement. And as their money starts coming in, 4% of everything, every dollar that comes through the door comes back to the city. And that host community agreement I negotiated was very unique in terms of the fact that 3% is going to the city finances and 1% is being designated, set aside to go to Brockton-based nonprofits that are providing support or treatment to people battling addiction. Because exactly what I said to him was, if you're going to make millions of dollars selling weed in our city, the least you can do is give us a penny out of every dollar back to help the people that are having a problem.
What's the estimated revenue and when?
We have a $100,000 minimum guarantee on the host community agreement. So in year one, we'll get at least $100,000. Who knows how much business they'll ultimately do. And that's why they offered in negotiations in the host community agreement, they wanted to agree on dollar amounts. I insisted on a percentage because my feeling is they're going to make an awful lot of money and that they were probably lowballing what they thought they were going to take in. And I wanted to make sure that as the numbers went higher, that meant more and more money for the city. And keep in mind, that's not a pilot in lieu of taxes. That property pays taxes. This is an agreement, a host community agreement, over and above the taxes that are paid on that building. Because I did feel very strongly that if the city is going to be a host city for this type of facility, that they needed to give something back towards the city. But those were tough negotiations, and I don't know exactly how to characterize them, but I think that we negotiated very hard to get the host community agreement we did, and I think we really held their feet to the fire on zoning. I tried to block the location based upon a recommendation from the building inspector about something being 1,000 feet from any type of classroom, and we figured out that it was less than 1,000 feet. They chopped off a piece of the lot so that they'd get the 1,000 feet. So I don't think if anyone was going to try to say that they get any type of special consideration for me, if anything, the opposite is true. And I had no say in whether they got the license or not. Jay Cashman has donated to my campaign for the same reason several of the trade unions have donated to my campaign. They'd like to see that electric plant get built in the city of Brockton, and they know what my position is. So they think it's beneficial to them to help me remain as the mayor. But I think that's completely transparent too. And the Brewster thing was filed out there. The Brewster one I could spend an hour talking about. That was a really tough decision. And one of the things that made it tough at the end is, my advisors at the end, when you get to the end of the process, said, AMR or Brewster, they're both qualified to do the job. You could go with either one, and they're both capable. It really is going to come down to what criteria you, meaning me personally, put more weight in, because they each have their strengths and weaknesses. So it's going to come, they're both qualified. It's going to come down to which Which one you decide, their strengths are more important. However, what they all said to me was, but beware, if you go to change that contract, that was a 32-year no-bid contract. That contract was renewed for 32 years, never once being put out to bid. You know, to me, that was the scandal. The scandal was, how in the world did these people get renewed for 32 years without ever once being put out to bid? So I felt it was, but they, again, back to my point, they said, beware, if you do award it to Brewster and you don't stay with AMR, there is going to be a political price to pay. The union, the AMR people are going to come at you hard. And they did. And they did. But I knew that. I knew when I made that decision there was going to be a political price to pay. I mentioned this at the Chamber of Commerce the other morning when we rolled out Brockton 2025, our 10-year economic development plan. When I rolled that out, I said, this is the first time, to my knowledge, Brockton's done this. I mean, we've identified 12 development districts over 10 years, what we're going to do, because when the mayor is on a 2-year election cycle, it's really hard to make good long-term decisions because a lot of good long-term decisions come with short-term consequences. And when you know you're up for re-election in less than 2 years, those are tough decisions to make.
Are you going to push for a 4-year term?
Not me. I don't think it's appropriate for me because I'm the guy that's in there. I would be hopeful that when the new council comes in January, that they would consider charter reform and look at the whole charter, not just that piece, but look at the whole charter. Because I do think the 2-year term, having done it once now, for the reasons I said, it makes it hard to make good long-term decisions. However, with Brockton 2025, we spent a lot of time developing a 10-year plan. Do I think I'm going to be around to see the finish of 2025? I'm pretty sure I won't. I'd like to be around for the middle. I'm pretty sure I won't be here for the end. But getting back to the Brewster, I really felt it was time for a change. I thought Brewster offered some unique things that AMR didn't. And I thought it was the right decision. It was a 5-year decision. I thought it was the right decision. I believed it was the right decision. And if I had to make that same decision again today, I would do it again. Because I think if you talk to people today, however many months we are into it, including my fire chief, who was 100% against me changing, if you ask him, actually they asked him at a city council meeting before last, how's it going? His exact words were, very well. If you ask him, he now will tell you that they are doing a great job. And anyone that's had any experience with them in these first few months, response times are down, more vehicles on the road, new equipment, all the things that were being thrown out there by the AMR union at the time just weren't true. They just weren't true. And they have, and I give them credit, they've hired several of the veteran AMR paramedics. I think they've hired 3 out of their top 4 or 4 out of their top 5. And actually made most of them supervisors on the road. But, you know, there was a ton of resistance to that move. Resistance from the hospitals, resistance from the fire department, resistance from the AMR union. But I honestly believe it was the right decision to make. And that decision had nothing to do with $4,000 worth of campaign contributions a year earlier. They already gave me the campaign contributions. And I didn't even know how much they gave until people started complaining. I was aware they had donated, did not even know what the amount was. I don't really watch it that closely. I try to stay as far away from the money as possible.
So who spends it?
Well, I think it's a combination. I do have input on the spending decisions. I do have input on the spending decisions. When I say stay far away from us, I stay away from collecting it and counting it. Okay. I do have input on the strategic decisions. But I think we have a whole group of us. We have a whole group of us in the campaign that will sit around and kind of kick things around.
Campaign donations ever?
No. No. I'm not saying that people in the campaign don't. But do I personally go up and say, hey, I could use a check? No. absolutely not. I ask people for their vote. I never ask them for money. I'm uncomfortable asking them for money. I think it's the hardest part. It's the hardest part. And you certainly don't, you don't refuse legal contributions. In two of those cases, it nothing to do with me anyhow. The ambulance one is the only one you could try to draw any type of a connection. And we did everything right. So, as compared to my opponent that has had Eddie Byers now disclose that he spent over $24,000 in 2 postcard mailings to attack and smear me, the second one that hit the street yesterday, because they're using a loophole in the campaign finance law that says so long as it doesn't support one individual candidate, that business can use their corporate checkbook, spend thousands of dollars, and all they have to do is disclose it, not subject to the $1,000 per year limit, use the corporate checkbook, which in any other case you can't do. His filings show, with the latest filing, $23,900 and something for 2 mailings. What does Chris McMillan owe Eddie Byers if he wins the election? $24,000 worth of undisclosed donations. They're not listed on his campaign website. I think that's a far better question for examination. I would say, they like to say, well, Cashman's a special interest. Guess what? Stop the Power is a special interest too.
Switching gears a little, you have a reputation for having been out in front in the opioid addiction crisis,
Yep.
And for being really committed to finding a solution. Do you support the recommendations of the governor's opioid addiction working group, which you served on, and the legislation he introduced last week?
There were 68 recommendations. I don't think any of us agree with all of them. Mm-hmm. I agree with the vast majority. Mm-hmm. I think that there were some issues, and I try to think of one for you.
What about the legislation, the bill he introduced?
The 72 hours?
72 hours civil commitment from emergency departments.
Yes. I was there when he announced it. In the 72-hour initial pain prescription, 72 hours. I support both of them. One of the recommendations coming out of that group was we had to reform Section 35. Mm-hmm. And what that legislation does is make Section 35 look like Section 12, which is the mental health one, mm-hmm. that gives any medical professional the ability to hold someone for up to 72 hours if they think that they could be a harm to themselves or someone else. Mm-hmm. Long overdue with addiction treatment, because we've got people walking out of emergency rooms every day. We've got people walking away from paramedics every day. We revived someone that was just dead, and now they're back up on their feet.
Narcan again.
They walk away.
But where are the beds to put them?
Well, that's a great question, and that's something I advocated over and over.
Are we putting the cart before the horse with it?
No, because people are dying every day.
Right,
and we ought to be doing what we say to. We're going to find them places.
What about the provision?
They've made a commitment. They're adding about 70 female beds. They've added over 110 beds overall since we started.
They're not adding beds for women. They're merely transferring them.
No, that's not true. There's only a handful of beds at Framingham. The number of beds in Taunton is dramatically higher. I think there's a maximum of 12 or 15 in Framingham. It's 50 or 60 in Taunton, and going to be more.
But not a dramatic increase. I believe it's 42 at Framingham, but I'd have to check.
It's definitely not 42, and the people didn't belong there anyhow.
No,
civil commitment. Someone being civilly committed does not belong in a
Right.
criminal facility. But the men have a almost similar situation at Bridgewater. Not everyone goes to Meadowbrook Road, and Bridgewater, although it's in a separate building,
Mm-hmm.
is a correctional facility. You get put in an orange jumpsuit. There's bars on the walls. You're treated like a prisoner. You're not treated like a patient.
And how many Section 35 beds would you personally like to see?
I don't know what the number is. I think the answer.
About 8,000 petitions
Right.
each year.
Many of which don't go through.
Right.
I think that on the working group, what we identified as part of the solution to the shortage of beds. No one advocates for treatment beds any harder than me. Mm-hmm. So you're not getting a debate from me as to whether we need more beds. We need more beds, no doubt about it. I think that one of the things we identified as a group to help alleviate the pressure on the beds is that we have to start thinking differently about the entry point into the treatment system. Not everyone necessarily today has to go to a detox facility in order to get substance abuse treatment. You know, there are people that may be a better fit as some intensive outpatient treatment. There are folks that maybe can transition right into a 60-day program somewhere. We're not doing a good job of getting our vets over the VA, where they've got 123 overnight beds for mental health and substance abuse disorders. So I think that we're looking, I think part of the answer is regional centers that allow multiple points of entry into the system, and not saying that every single person has to enter the system at the same point, because it's not one size fits all. Everyone's in a different situation. I'll tell you, and it's not done yet, so we haven't rolled it out yet, and it's not a campaign piece, because if it were, I would have got it done before the election. But we're working very actively on a Brockton version of the Gloucester plan, which is going to be much more far-reaching, and I think be far more effective. And I think it partly addresses what you're talking about, because another big part of the problem, here's the one criticism of the 72-hour rule that I would have. It's not no space for treatment beds. We can fix that, and not overnight, but we can fix that. And I think that we can access the system in different ways to get more mileage out of what we've got, because also at the same time, administratively, they raised the daily rate for long-term residential beds, and that now allows facilities to open up more residential beds and be able to break even or make a little profit on them. So now you can push more people into those beds. The emergency rooms are bursting at the seams.
And that's the problem.
Right. So in the Champion plan, which we're planning to call it as of right now, we're going to try to bypass, we think we can bypass the emergency room with 90% of the people that we're getting help for, because we're all in agreement that the vast majority of those people at the moment we're trying to get them treatment are not medically at risk. They don't have to be in a medical facility. They need to be in a safe place, getting support and getting assistance to get into treatment. That safe place can be a room at one of the Brewster ambulance locations where there's a paramedic keeping an eye on them, and there's an angel like the Gloucester plan helping them get into treatment. And so our goal, and one of the goals in the Champion plan, is to have a paramedic immediately medically triage the person, knowing that 90% of the time the person doesn't really have to go to the emergency room. And we feel by doing that, one of the big advantages to this will be to alleviate some of that pressure on the emergency room, that the only folks that are going to the emergency room are people who are medically at risk.
And then bring them where?
Well, that's the tricky part. So we're working with a number of the facilities and getting them to commit a number of beds to us, preference on a number of beds. I think Brockton is uniquely positioned because, number one, we're bringing the VA into the loop. If it's 10% of the folks that we're trying to get help for, if it's 5% that are veterans, and we can get them directly to the VA campus and get them right into their system, we just expanded our capacity by 5, 7, 8, 10%, because we're not putting them into the same pipeline as usual. We've got that High Point Treatment Center right here in the city of Brockton. It has both detox and Section 35 beds, and now they even have some longer-term beds, along with the children's program, adolescent program. We have a VA hospital campus that has 123 beds. We've got an ambulance service that has made a commitment that they will transport all of these folks, whether they're getting insurance reimbursement or not. They're going to provide the transport, hope they can collect off some of them to offset some of the expenses, and willing to bring to the VA, which the prior carrier was not willing to do. So I think as we start pulling all these things together, that we're going to create something that I believe is going to be a model for a lot of other cities and communities to follow. But you're right, these programs will only work with the capacity for more beds. Now, a recommendation that I made in the working group that didn't make it to the 68 recommendations, because there were never, however, while we're talking about that, in those recommendations, not actually legislation, but it was in the things that were implemented, was for the DPH and DESE being mandated to come up with a transportation plan for students to recovery schools. I lobbied like the daylights for that. That's one that does have my fingerprints on it, because from my experience I can see that. One I lobbied for that didn't make it, and getting back to your medical marijuana question, I proposed a 5% excise tax on all medical marijuana sales statewide, with all of that money absolutely being earmarked for expanding treatment programs. I think if you got 5% of the medical marijuana action, you could build and pay for all the treatment beds we need.
And what was the resistance?
I don't know. I did just a lot of people loved my host community agreement, but it just I don't know why it didn't make the final. I mean, but it was one of my suggestions. But I did have a number of suggestions that did make it.
Can we move on to an issue that you guys differ on? Because I'm not sure we talked to McMillan enough about the drug epidemic.
He's lost on that issue.
The power plant is one thing you guys clearly differ on.
Yep.
When did you support the power plant and why? When did you decide you supported it and why?
Before I ran for office, for sure. Very early on, I was in opposition to the power plant. I was for a while. My opposition was based primarily around the diesel fuel component of it. I couldn't see the roads and the infrastructure in that location handling the trucks and the storage of the amount of diesel fuel, or whatever they call their version of diesel fuel, there. So I would say the fact that when that was eliminated from the design, that went a long ways towards changing my opinion. I would also say that when I did start thinking about running for office, I did a lot more due diligence than I had done before. And I knew that this was an issue. I really had to take a hard look at it. And the harder I looked at it, I came to the conclusion that a lot of the propaganda that had been put out by Stop the Power just wasn't true. So let me give you a couple of examples. The opponents of that plant have always said that the air on the south side of the city is more polluted than it is in other parts of the city. And so that was one of the reasons why that was a bad site, because they already had more than their fair share of polluting business down there. They didn't deserve to get another one. So because of their lobbying on that issue, about 2.5 years ago, because we've been collecting data from the roof of the post office for over 10 years.
When it works.
Okay, when it works.
Yeah.
But there's over 10 years of data.
Okay.
But because of the lobbying and activism of the opponents of the electric plant, about 2.5 years ago, a monitoring station was put in the playground next to the Gilmore School, extremely close, walking distance from the proposed site of this plant. Look at the 2.5 years worth of data, compare it to what's downtown. On average, the air is slightly cleaner on the south side of the city. The readings are slightly better than they are from the downtown monitoring station. That's why you don't hear them mentioned anymore. They used to yell and scream it all the time. When's the last time you heard Stop the Power yelling that there's an injustice here because the air on the south side is more polluted? Well, the reason they don't say it anymore is they know the data doesn't back it up. Another one of the big objections, Steve, that the opponents have always cited is they've said that it wasn't needed. There wasn't enough demand for it. This thing would go out of business if you built it. The grid doesn't need their electricity. This is some sort of a white elephant. It's just not needed. Well, I think if there was, and I believe there was, because you can see that the more polluting types of plants are being taken offline and they have to be replaced. Natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel we have, and the technology has not got to the point yet that solar or wind can provide what we need. But with the announcement that Pilgrim is shutting down, I think that's the end of that discussion.
But I'm more curious.
The region's losing 10% of its electric supply, yet one of the reasons for not building it was was the fact that they said there's not a need for the power. Clearly, there's an immediate need for
But I'm more
electricity.
curious when you came to the realization that the city, you were for, because I know you were against it for a while.
I absolutely was against it. I
So,
said
I'm
I
not
was
clear
against it
yet,
for a
yeah,
while.
I'm not clear
I don't know
when
if I
you-
can.
When you changed and why, and was there some fat piece of information that came along? Or how
Yeah,
did you
well, I
change?
would say that my opinion was, I mean, you don't wake up one day and say, well, I think I've changed my mind on that.
Sure.
So I think that my opinion evolved over a period of time, and that I began to question, particularly once the diesel was removed, I began to question whether I really was opposed anymore. I think that when I was thinking about running for office, before I even announced that I was running, I'm not an idiot. I knew it would be a central issue in the first campaign, and I knew I would have to have a very clear position on it. So I did a lot of due diligence, which included, you saw that video that I produced in the last campaign, visiting 5 other plants, because I wanted to see for myself what they look like, what the impact is, all that type of thing. I did a lot of due diligence on it. And then that's combined, Steve. The other factor is the status of the litigation against the city.
But do you think, even before that, do you think Brockton wants the power plant, the residents on a whole?
I think a majority of the people in the city support the construction of the plant at this point in time. Now, whether they did 8 years ago or not, that's a whole nother question. But I think anyone, and let me get back to the litigation, I think that anyone with an open mind, when I explain where the city is in terms of that $68 million civil rights lawsuit, what the outcome of it will be if we want to litigate it to the very end, and what the impact will be on the city, I think that there's no one with an open mind that can look at that and not say the only decision for the city is to settle. Steve, we've spent $1.5 million on legal advice. That advice is universal. You have to settle.
And not to go on it, but I know it's one of the defining points between you and Mr. McMillan.
Well, I think
If
it's
that's the case,
one of them.
why is the council?
I think there are a lot. I think there are a lot more points than just
I know,
the
but this
electric
is one.
plant.
This is one big issue that's been going on for years now. If people are sort of wanted, how come it isn't happening? Why is the city council still against it unanimously?
I think right now. I think that first of all, I entered into the settlement, and I think I spent about a half-hour, 45-minute press conference with all the attorneys and everyone there explaining all the exact reasons. I think that with that settlement, the judge accepted the settlement. The judge put a stay in place on the lawsuit. And what the lawyers explained to me is this is exactly what happens when you're settling, because now there are a number of things that both sides have to do before a plant can begin construction. There are permits that have to be issued, including they have to go back, I believe, and get their DEP air permit updated, and that process is going on right now. You can go on the DEP website and see what the dates are with that. Their site plan is in front of the planning board site plan review right now. So essentially, the settlement calls for both sides to accomplish a number of things to get to the point where these developers will have all their permits and licenses, break ground, and begin construction of the plant. Between now and then, the lawsuit is on stay. That protects the plaintiffs. That protects the developers, that if the city were to then subsequently renege on any of the commitments it made, they could immediately go running right back to the federal judge, say, these guys haven't done what they're supposed to do. We want to proceed with the litigation. The thing kicks right back in. To answer your question about the city council, I'll tell you what I think. I was very patient with the council. I think I spent about 3 months while the council quietly deliberated whether they would sign off on a settlement. They had their own attorney that the taxpayers also paid for, and they were given essentially the same advice by their attorney, who had been consulting with the city attorneys and then conveying information to the council. If you ask me why the council didn't settle, I think it was strictly a political decision. They knew I would settle it whether they did or not. And I think they just knew I would settle it. They knew they wouldn't put the city in this financial jeopardy. And I think for some of the longer term counselors, they felt like politically they had themselves painted in a corner. How do you spend 4 or 6 or 8 years saying you're opposed to it and then sign off on a settlement to the lawsuit? I think that's what they should have done.
So would the lawsuit sway you to some extent?
I'm 100% comfortable with the project, whether there was a lawsuit or not. However, I think in my role and responsibility as the mayor of the city, in knowing what I know today after spending almost 2 years with the attorneys that have been litigators, keep in mind, I kept Linda Balzotti's law office. I did not let any of the people go that she had hired because I thought it was important that the same attorneys that had been handling that case, if we were in the private sector and I became the CEO of a company that was involved in a lawsuit that could put it out of business, I don't think anyone would think it would be a good business decision to change lawyers in the middle of that litigation. I felt the same way coming in. Now, I've developed a great working relationship with Phil Nesralla. I think Kate Federoff is outstanding, but I didn't even know those